What's up everybody, David here, and today I'm going to be taking you guys through the heavier demo that I did for Toneforge Misha Mansoor. In case you forgot, this one. Now, I was really stoked, actually I still am really stoked on that mix I got for that demo, so I thought it would be cool to show you guys how I got there, how I mixed it, and literally everything I did. So let's not waste any more time, let's jump into the DAW and get started. Alright, so before we get into it, I want to talk a little bit about the mix setup, what sounds we are using, how the mix is set up, and all that good stuff. So first of all, you'll see a pre-main 1 and a pre-main 2 at the bottom. This is something I got from the Andrew Wade Attila month on Nail the Mix, and this is something he did in that mix that I really liked. So basically the whole mix runs into pre-main 1 where he does his 2-bus processing, then he does his limiting into pre-main 2, and then the main thing has nothing on it. The main output doesn't have any processing on it. And this allows you to do some automation before the limiter and export versions of your mix without the limiter easily. And yeah, it's just a cool technique. So I am not doing any mix automation on this specific mix, but this is now built into my template, so that's why you'll see these 2 extra buses at the bottom here. As far as the sounds we used in this mix, I used the GetGood Drums Modern and Massive kit. For the bass guitar, I am not happy about this, but I used a MIDI bass. I think it's like Zombass 4 or something. I do not care for MIDI bass at all, but I don't have a bass guitar that's set up for drop G or drop G sharp. I think that's what this is in. So I used MIDI bass on this one. Oh God, I absolutely hate that. I'm sorry. For the guitars, it is my Schecter ATX 7-string into a Radio Pro DI straight into the interface, and the only thing we're using on guitars is Toneforge Misha Mansoor. Alright, so let's get started. We're going to start with the drums here. So one more time, this is what the drums sound like by themselves. Actually, this is what the mix sounds like by itself, with no processing. Right? It sounds like mega sick. So we're going to make it even mega sicker. Yeah, okay, so let's start with the kick drum. No, don't do that. Okay, the kick drum. Alright, so I'm just going to loop a section of the kick drum, and we're going to see how it sounds with no processing. Here we go. So right off the bat, it sounds great. Of course, that is why I used Modern and Massive, just because they sound amazing out of the box. And of course, as you're seeing, all these drums are exported into audio. It just saves processing power to not work with Contact all the time. And yeah, it's just easier for me that way. So first thing I have on the kick is the Studio One stock EQ. I'm pulling out some of the flubbiness I don't like in kick drums around 150, then pulling out some of the mids around 519. So I'm going to shut these off and turn them on as we go. I'm going to do that with every bit of processing on this mix so you can see what every single move that I did is making, what kind of difference it is doing. Here we go. That's all it's really doing. So I'm just cleaning up the signal a little bit before we go into the virtual mix rack. So in the virtual mix rack, I start off with the virtual channel on the USA preset. I really like this because it adds a good amount of bottom end and a nice top end to everything I run through it, especially vocals. I really like vocals through this. So that's just kind of adding some top end, a little bit of liveliness. And then I have it going into the API at 12.5, adding 2 dB just to give it some top end on the click. And then I have it running into the FG Stress, which is of course our distressor emulation. And I'm using the Kick Aggressive preset. I thought I'd try it out, sounded cool, and I just rolled with it. So let's see what each of these is doing. That's it. You can see I'm not running a ton of compression here, maybe 2 dB of compression, and I don't know, it just sounds cool, so I stuck with it. So now let's move on to the kick sub. So for this one, all I did was pull out that same flubbiness and cut out some low end, just like I did on the actual kick drum. So I'll shut this EQ off and turn it on. If you don't have a sub, you might not hear this, but if you do, then you will hear it. So here we go. Once again, not a massive difference. I'm just trying to focus that low end a little bit more. So then I have both kick drums running into a bus with JST clip. And now that I'm going back to this, I don't really hear the clip doing much, but it's on there. So I'm just gonna leave it there. Yeah, I don't know why I did that because there's really not that much going on, but whatever, sounds cool. So we're gonna move on to the snare. So I have the snare top mic and the snare bottom mic. So first on the top, let's see how it sounds. Let's find a portion with some good snare hits. This sounds good right here. So I'm gonna select this. All right, so now let's go to the EQ. First thing I did is really some basic EQ moves. It might look kind of complicated, but it's really not. So I'm just cutting out some low end, adding a little bit of body at 200, cutting out some mids at 500, adding a little bit of crack at, what is that, 1.1K, and then just adding a top end shelf just to make the snare a little brighter. So once again, I'm gonna shut each of these off. We're gonna turn them on one by one and see how it changes the sound. And now all at once. Now that just makes the snare a little bit more exciting, and that's exactly what I wanted. And it's gonna cut through the mix a little bit better now. So then I have it going into the Kramer Pi. On this one, we're not compressing that much. I think I'm getting like 3 dB out of this, but once again, it's minimal and it just sounds great. So I'm definitely just hearing it add a little bit of body, adds a little bit more snap to the snare, and it just sounds good. So then we have it going into the JST clip. This is adding a lot of power to the snare and just kind of helping it cut through a little bit more, which I really like. So now let's go to the snare bottom. First thing I have is the Pro EQ once again, pulling out some mids, pulling out some weird frequencies at 2K, and then just a high shelf to brighten it up a little bit. So once again, one by one, let's turn all these on. Just trying to focus in the mic a little bit more and just make it a little brighter and more exciting. Then I have it going into the 1176 compressor inside of the fat channel. And yeah, let's see how this sounds. So that's just giving it a little more body and a little bit more of a crack, but it's really not much. I'm not getting a ton of compression, maybe 4 dB here. And it's bringing out kind of the tail end of the snare as well, which also sounds cool. So together, this is what they sound like. So the snare is sounding pretty fat there. So then I have the snare going into, at least the top mic, I have it going into an effects channel with reverb. And on this, I'm using the Reverb. I don't know what I used for this. I think I did a medium haul and just kind of dialed in my settings from there, but this is what that sounds like. Then it's going into the Pro EQ to pull out some tubiness I found at, let's see, what is that? 191 Hertz. I'm also adding gain after the EQ as well, so that's why it's getting a little bit louder. But yeah, that's everything for the snare drums. So now let's move on to the toms. Or actually, before we get to the toms, let's go to the room mics. I want to kind of have a full picture of the kit before we move to the toms. That's how I usually mix. I'll usually go, I'll do a balance, I'll do kick, snare, and then I'll move to the rooms and then overheads. So with the room tracks, I took the close mics and the far mics and just put them all into a bus and I processed them all together. This is really the first time I've done that, but it came out cool. So let's hear them with no processing. Oh, I should probably take loop off, huh? So So it sounds pretty good. First thing I did was an EQ. On this one, I'm pulling out some low end, pulling out some of that tubiness I don't like, a little bit of mid-range, some weird frequencies at 5K, and then a small roll-off at 16K. So once again, I'm going to turn all this off and turn them all on as we go. Here we go. So these to me right here, the 5K and the roll off at 16 make the biggest difference to me. I usually like to do this to overheads and rooms, especially at 5K and around that area, just because it kind of softens the cymbals a little bit and makes them a little less harsh. So that made a pretty big difference to me. And then after that, we're going into the virtual mix rack. I'm using the Brit 4K E channel and then into the FG Stress, which on this one, I used a medium attack, medium release. I basically left it exactly how it was and just dialed in the input, and it sounded great. So let's turn these on and see what they're doing. So obviously you're hearing a volume difference, especially with that FG Stress, but my processing here is so minimal, but it just kind of brings the room to life. That's all I really wanted to do. I didn't want to go overboard here. With Mono to Massive, you really don't need to because they sound so good out of the box. But yeah, the rooms turned out really cool. That's the first time I've ever put them into a group like that, but they sound cool. So I'll probably end up doing that again. So this is what we have with the snare and the kit, close mics, and the room. So right now it already sounds great. We're just kind of missing that top end that we're going to get from the overheads. So let's check out the overheads. Once again, the left and right are bussed into a overhead bus where I do all my processing. So once again, we're going into the Pro EQ where I'm rolling off some low end, rolling off some mids, and then also taking care of some of that harshness I mentioned when doing the room tracks. So once again, I'm going to shut all these off and let's see what they're doing. Once again, that makes a pretty big difference to me. It's just really taming those cymbals and making them a little bit smoother and just easier on the ears. So then once again, we have them going into the virtual mix rack. On this one, I used a preset again. I used the FG Stress preset, Wakey Wakey for overheads. It sounds cool. I just dial in the input and I move on with my life. And then I have it going into Revival to just add a little bit of top end sheen to the cymbals, and that's it. Here we go. So the compressor, other than volume, is making a pretty big difference. It's really bringing out the sustain of the cymbals. It's bringing up the snare a little bit. And Revival is very minimal, but like I said, it's just adding some sheen to the drums. So now let's take the overheads, the rooms, and the close mics and see where we're at. So this is sounding really good, and it's at this point where I usually bring in the toms once I have a solid kit built. And the toms, once again, very simple processing on these. So I'm going to loop these and let's see what they sound like with nothing. So I'll start with the second toms. This is going to be the first floor tom. Okay, let's try soloing it. So once again, they sound great off the bat. For this one, I started with Virtual Mix Rack. I added some top end to shelf at 5K, added a little bit of attack for the stick at 2.3, took out some mids, and did a little bit of high pass filtering. And then I ran it through Revival for a little bit more top end. Once again, really simple processing here. So let's check it out. Like I said, really simple. This EQ is doing a lot of the heavy work. It completely changes the sound of the tom, and I really like that. So I think I actually ended up copying pasting that setting over to pretty much every tom. So I did that for the rack tom as well. And then the toms are going into a bus where I have them going in a virtual mix rack once again, but this time I'm adding some tube saturation. I'm doing the London because that's like low end city, and then I'm compressing them a little bit. So once again, this is basically the stock settings for FG Stress. It's just right out of the box, this thing sounds killer. I think I just changed the ratio from 4:1 to 6:1, and that's all I did. So it's going into a bus where it's getting some saturation and a little bit of compression. Now let's combine it with the kit. Now the toms sound really good, but on second thought, when I go back to this mix, I feel like they could be a little louder, but that's okay. We'll leave them where they're at for now. So now the last part of the drums we have is the hi-hat. So going over to the hi-hat, all I did on this was EQ. It's the only thing I touched. And once again, it sounds great just right out of the box. For EQ, I'm just pulling out some mids and adding in some highs. And that's it. That's my EQ for the hi-hat. So if we play it in the mix, let's hear what kind of effect it has. And that's it for the hi-hat. So let's play the whole drum kit all together now. All right, so the drums are sounding pretty good now. So now we move to the drum bus. First thing on the drum bus is the decapitator. Now I'm basically doing the standard trick here on the decapitator where I just distort the high end, not the low end, and then I blend that in with the original signal. So let's check that out. Nope, we don't need the loop. Let's try that again. So I hear the biggest difference in that snare. It makes the snare pop much more, but one thing you're gonna realize is that we actually lose a little bit of low end doing that. So we're gonna go back into the virtual mix rack and I'm gonna add a little more of that low end back into the drums. First, we have it going into the virtual channel, into the Brit 4K, just to add some excitement, the E channel specifically. And then we have it going into the, what is this? The custom series lift, and we're just adding some low end back in. I just love everything this virtual channel does. It sounds sick all the time. So after that, we're going into the JST clip on the whole drum bus. Now, all that's really doing is just kind of evening out the drum bus, but you're also hearing a volume difference because I did use the trim knob to pull the volume down after running it through the clipper to blend in with the mix a little bit. But that is everything for the drums. I wanted to keep the drums, I don't know, for the most part, natural, quote unquote. I just didn't want to go too much with them, and I really wanted to utilize the rooms inside of GetGood drums because that's like some of my favorite parts about GetGood drums. And yeah, they came out really cool. Now let's move on to the bass. Once again, I don't have a drop G bass setup to record with. I should have one soon. I did not at the time of recording this, so I had to use MIDI bass. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I did what I had to do. So this is what the bass tone sounds like with no processing. So it sounds like a MIDI bass, not particularly a very good one, but that's okay. So first thing I do is run it into the SHB Ignites bass head. Just adding that clink into the bass signal. Then I have it going into an IR loader in which I use an Ampeg 8x10, and yeah, this is what it sounds like. It's got a ton of low end. So it really smooths out that bass and gives it a ton of low end. Then I have it going into the virtual mix rack using the bass guitar aggressive preset on the FG Stress, which is absolutely killer. I would recommend that you guys try this. It just works every time. Throw it on the bass, dial in the input, and it sounds amazing. I've been trying a lot of these presets inside the FG Stress, and they're actually really good. So just on a side note, try them out. They have some cool stuff in there, and I get really good results. And then I also have the FGS, which I'm apparently not using. But okay, so then it goes into the Air EQ Earth to add some more bottom end and to just add those really subby lows in there. So let's see what these are doing. It just sounds awesome. Next to the Air EQ. If you guys have speakers with low end or using headphones with low end or a sub, there's a pretty big difference with this Air EQ Earth on. It does wonders for bass, so I would definitely recommend trying it out. So after that, we're going into the Pro EQ, which is doing nothing. What? Okay, I don't know why these things are on there if they're not doing anything, but okay, moving on. So that is the bass tone with no distortion on it. That's just a regular bass tone. So let's bring that in with the drums and see how it sounds. Alright, so it sounds pretty cool, but it's not aggressive enough, so I put a grit track under the bass, and for this I used Toneforge Misha Mansoor, just like I did with the Poppy demo I also did in the Misha demo. And yeah, apparently I used a precision drive on this one. I did not remember that, but okay, so let's see what this sounds like. So that sounds pretty bad right there. That doesn't sound very good, but it's a grit track. It's really never supposed to sound good. I use a precision drive and I'm dialing it in kind of a lot actually, especially in the volume here. And then I have it going into an amp with low gain on the lead channel and then into the matched cab. And yeah, that's all I did for the bass grit tone. So let's blend it in with the regular bass tone. Alright, so now let's see how it sounds with the drums. So really just trying to add a little more aggression with that bass grit. I'm not crazy stoked about the bass guitar here. I'm not a fan of MIDI, but that's neither here nor there. So let's move on to the guitars. So this is the fun part. The only thing I put on these guitars is Toneforge Misha Mansoor. That is it. So I'm gonna bring this to the center real quick and we're gonna go through the tone that I used. So with this tone, I did use a precision drive. I have it pretty high on the volume, so I basically a 6 on the volume is pretty much maxed out on a Tube Screamer, so it is very aggressive here. The drive is at 34, the attack is at 2, and the brightness is halfway. So the gate is halfway, but I don't really use the gate here because everything is already chopped up before it hits the amp, so it's not really doing much there. And then it's going into the amp with very, very low gain. I think that's 3 there, super low gain, a lot of lows, a lot of mids, a decent amount of highs, bringing up the tight in the saturation, and then left the presence alone, but brought in a little harmonics and compression. For the cab, I'm using the JST matched cab, no effects on this guy, and we are doing a little bit of EQ, pulling out some harshness at 3K, and then adding in some top end at 5, pulling out some mids at 500, and then adding in a little low end at 100, and we are not using the compressor here. So I'm gonna turn on this tone, I'm gonna deactivate the Horizon drive, I'm gonna deactivate the EQ, and we're gonna turn these on to see what kind of difference that made to the tone. So the Horizon drive sounds really good. The Precision drive, I mean, I think I was a little too heavy-handed on that drive, so I dialed that back here just so the palm mutes didn't get totally lost. But that's what the drive is doing. It's making a pretty good difference. It's making it very aggressive, and it's tightening up the signal quite a bit. That's why I added so much low end in here, because when you use the drive on the Precision drive, you start to pull out some of the low end. So I try to compensate on the amp and then as well with the EQ afterwards. So let's turn on the EQ and see what that's doing. So really just trying to focus in the signal a little bit more. Some of the mids were getting a little out of hand and there was a little harshness at 3K, but I'm gonna turn off each of these one by one and show you the difference that they actually made. So that was 1, 2, 3, and 2. Okay, so let's turn all these on and make the changes just so you can see how the tone evolves. So you can see as we pulled out the 3K, it kind of robbed some of the clarity in the tone. That's why I added the 5K back in to try and bring that back into the signal. And that is a guitar tone there. So because I made changes to the Precision drive, I'm going to copy that over to the right guitar. And these are both guitars with the Misha Mansoor Toneforge on it. So they are very mid-range focused, but I think they sound dope. So here's everything in the entire mix. So I remember I said I wasn't crazy stoked about the bass tone, but after putting in the mix, I see why I did what I did. It cuts through pretty nicely, and it sounds good with everything. It's a little lower than I normally would have in a mix with a bass tone, but because it's a MIDI and I'm not too stoked on how the MIDI sounds, I kind of lower the volume a little bit more. But yeah, it does sound pretty cool in the mix, so maybe I'm a little too harsh with the bass tone actually. So now let's check out the clean tone, specifically in the later half of the demo where it gets pretty heavy with the palm mutes and the breakdown. So this is the DI of that clean part. So that's not very interesting there, but once we put it through Toneforge Misha Mansoor, this is what we get out of it. That's what I'm looking for. So we have it on the clean channel. I have it on the, I guess, first channel of the gain staging, on the first of the three. I don't know. It's on the first channel, clean channel. It sounds dope. So left the lows alone, added a little bit of mids, shaved off some highs so it wasn't as harsh. It just made it a little bit smoother, and some of those harmonics from the delay and the reverb weren't as in your face and prominent. Left the tight saturation and purr alone and added a little bit more top end and presence. Not a huge difference, but I just wanted that pick attack to poke through a little bit more. Then added some harmonics and compression. For the cab, I used the JST Classic with the Royer 121, and it just sounds really cool with those clean tones. I like this mic on clean stuff. For the effects, let's get to the fun part. Honestly, okay, this kind of bugs me about Toneforge Misha Mansoor. I really wish before you zoomed in, like before you zoom in, it would display the same settings. I think it's really weird because I always go to this channel and I'm like, oh, I used 1/4 here, and then I click on it and everything is completely different. So JST, if you're listening, that'd be super dope if you can make this match the actual settings. Just a little nitpicky, but yeah, that'd be dope. So these are my settings for the delay. It is 1/8, it's post, and the mix is pretty low. I have the tape delay on, which means it's a little less hi-fi, a little less top end. It is stereo, and the tone is almost about halfway. And let's turn that off. Actually, let's turn off all the effects and just start with the delay. Here we go. You can see definitely how that digital completely changes the sound of that delay. I like the tape one a little bit more because I feel like it blends in with the background a little bit more, which is what I'm going for. If you want it to be more prominent, definitely try the digital one. So next, let's go to the reverb. This reverb is really, really cool. I think I actually did not touch anything. I think I turned it on and adjusted the mix, and that was it. It just sounded cool. I might have messed with this tone a little bit, but yeah, the reverb sounds amazing. So that reverb can get really out of hand if you go too far with it. What I wanted it to do there is just push that clean back and really smooth it out and give it a little more space and ambience, which is exactly what it did. So now let's go to the EQ. Once again, it got a little harsh at 3K. I made a 7 dB cut there, which is pretty intense. And then I also added a little bit of top end at 10K here. So let's turn those off, or let's put those back to normal, and we'll make those same cuts and boosts and see what it does. So as you heard when I turned those mids up, it gets really harsh with the harmonics from those notes. That's what I wanted to take out, and it just really smooths out that track. And then I'm just adding a little bit of top end for that pick attack so it cuts through when the rest of the breakdown is playing. So let's hear it with everything. This was always meant to be a background thing, and that's exactly what it's doing, but especially when it stops, it gets exciting right there, and it really just cuts into the mix, and it adds some serious ambience. So the last thing we have in this mix is a little guitar riff that you might not have heard over the breakdown. So this is the DI. So that just plays on the second half of the breakdown just to spice it up a little bit. Now the tone is different on this one. So we're using the precision drive, but we are not using the actual drive. We're just using the attack, the brightness, and the volume on this one. Like I said, the drive will suck some of the low end out of it. So I did not go that route on this one. We are using, I believe, a different tone stack. Let me double check. So the tone stack on the rhythm tone, first channel. Oh, is it the same one? Oh, so it is the same tone stack, but we're a little more aggressive there. And we're a little bit more aggressive on the presence as well. We use some more presence, we use more compression, more harmonics, and that was all to get it to cut through the original tone. I wanted it to stand out a little bit more than the original. And we also used a different cab too, just because if you want something to sound different than another guitar tone, simply use a different cab. That's a really easy way to switch it up and to make something sound different. So in this one, we use the Pine PV 4x12 with the SM57. And as far as the EQ, we did not do any. Cool. I didn't remember that part. All right, so let's see how this tone sounds by itself. So that tone is significantly brighter than the actual rhythm tone itself, and that just kind of helps it stand out a little bit. So we're gonna bring that into the actual mix, and I'll mute it and unmute it just so you can see the little bit it's adding to the breakdown. So that tone, to me, doesn't sound as good as the actual rhythm tone, but it was never supposed to. It was just supposed to add a little bit under the breakdown, and I think that's exactly what it did. So I think it sounds pretty cool. Next, we have one effect, and that is just a little swoosh before the breakdown. So on that swoosh, I have an EQ where I'm pulling out a lot of the mids, a lot of the low end, then adding a little bit of presence on the top end. So let's see what it sounds like by itself. Yeah, it's a crazy swoosh. So it's just cutting out some of that low end information we don't need and adding that top end that we're gonna hear cut through the mix. So once again, here's before and after EQ. And that's all we did to the swoosh. So let's bring that into the actual mix. This is without. See that snare there is just boring. We gotta make it interesting, gotta add a lead up. So we add the swoosh. Look at that. But now there's another part to this that I did to make that a little bit more interesting. So we're gonna go over to our snare verb track and we're gonna show the automation. And you're gonna see that after that snare hit, I actually automated the snare track or the snare verb effects bus or whatever you wanna call it. I added 2.5 dB to that. So the reverb is louder on that snare hit than it is for all the other snare hits. So we're gonna shut this off and play it without it. It sounds good, but it just wasn't enough. Because I added a swoosh to that snare, I had to add emphasis to the reverb as well. So let's turn it on. It's not a massive difference, but it's just enough to make that snare pop a little bit more than it would have had I left that alone. Guys, automation is so much fun. Please use automation. You can do a lot with it. Even though I didn't really do much right here, it made a pretty big difference to me. It made that part much more interesting, especially because there's nothing playing here. Like, you gotta put something there to fill that void and to draw the listener to that part. And yeah, I think that worked out really well. So the last thing we have in this mix is the little lo-fi part that plays before it. So all I did there was add an EQ. So first of all, I mixed the whole thing down and then I chopped it up to be an intro. So this is that intro with no processing. Then I added an EQ and I cut out all the high end all the way down to 476 Hertz. But then I automated this actual low pass right here, this filter, to slowly come up during the course of that intro. So this is what the automation looks like. And it's not a straight line. That was too obvious, it's too linear. You gotta have something smooth to slowly build up. And this is what that sounds like. So that's kind of like that classic effect that you hear in songs when you want something to sound like music is coming from inside a house or inside of a car, because that high end doesn't translate outside the house or outside of that car. So that's kind of the effect I was going for, and I wanted it to slowly come into the full mix. And when you combine it with the full mix, it adds a lot. It adds a lot of suspense and it adds impact. This goes back to a video I made a while ago about taking things away just to put them back into a song. I will link that video in the description, but in a nutshell, I took away the high end so that the song honestly sounded boring. And then I put it back in all at once so that it comes in and you're like, whoa, this song just got huge, it just got exciting. And that was my goal with that. I took something away, and when I put it back, it made it that much better. So that's everything. That's the whole entire mix. Let's go to the master bus, or the pre-main one. I have one thing on this bus. It is the Joel Wanasek Bus Glue Mix. I absolutely love this plugin. It makes everything sound awesome. It just brings everything to life, and everything sounds no small time. And that is dope. So let's turn it off and on and see what it does. Okay, let's go to the actual mix this time though. It really brought the low end of that kick to hit you right in the chest. It brings some high end. I believe this brings some stereo widening. This just has a ton of magic in this plugin that just brings mixes to life, and I think it sounds awesome. One more time, let's check out the differences. That is a huge difference. Obviously, there is a volume difference here. You got to get over that. There is a volume difference happening, but there is also so much more. And Joe One Sec Plus Good Mix is easily, I think, the best plugin out of that whole set of plugins. So then it's going into Ozone 8 Elements. Now, I just got this. I got this for like $1 or something when they're doing a sale. And this has replaced my FGX because the FGX is ridiculously just crazy buggy and I cannot work with it anymore. So this is my new limiter right now. I might upgrade to the full Ozone, but I don't know, we'll see. And yeah, this is just getting the loudness out of the mix. I left the equalizer alone. I left the imager on stock settings. And yeah, I just kind of turned it up and made it loud. So this is what that sounds like. So I'm really stoked on the Ozone Elements. It's really making me want to upgrade to the full Ozone because after using this, I'm just like, this is fantastic. How good is a full version? I can't even imagine what that's doing. So yeah, guys, that is everything in this entire mix. I'm sure this is a little bit longer than I had intended, but I wanted to go through every single setting I did on this mix. I wanted to show you everything top to bottom, leave nothing out. This is everything I did. This is every single step and move I made to get this song from this to this. Now there are of course some things I can nitpick about this mix, things I would have done differently, but I don't care. I'm still proud of it regardless. I think it sounds dope. And yeah, I'm just stoked on this mix. I think it sounds cool, and I think there's some information in here that you guys might find useful. Hopefully you do find useful. If there's one thing I kind of nitpick, I could have humanized this much better. That sounds like a machine gun to me, bugs me every time I hear it, but you live and you'll learn. I'll just keep that in mind for next time I'm working on MIDI drums. But yeah, that is everything. That is the entire mix of the heavy demo I did for Toneforge Misha Mansoor. So that's it, guys. That's everything I did mixing that demo for Toneforge Misha Mansoor. I still wish I could have used an actual bass guitar. I'm not a fan of MIDI bass, but nonetheless, I think it turned out awesome. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. I hope you learned something from this. Maybe you're gonna try something new next time you go mix something. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are new videos every single week, and you don't want to miss any content. And of course, don't forget to ring the little bell to get notifications when I post new videos. On that note, guys, thank you again so much for watching. My name is David, and I will see you next time.